And now, my friends, one of the most important lessons that we have to learn. We're oftentimes told in ancient words of wisdom, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Don't fret. Don't be afraid. Here's a reminder that unfortunately, fear kills everything. And we need to learn how to help others identify and overcome the 5 big fears in life. And that's what we're going to try and help ourselves and help others to do. We do not have to become our fears. Parker Palmer taught me that. Here's the introduction. Any good coach comes to their client with questions, seeking clarity, with challenges, asking for commitment, and with strategies for success. That's what we do. Now, if the client takes this experience seriously, he or she will better understand what is wanted out of his life, their business. With this understanding, they can improve their performance in order to create and attract the good things that they desire and want in life. That's what can happen. Gaining greater awareness, setting goals, being more focused, and getting better organized are part of the process. Being held accountable and personally responsible will contribute to the success of the coaching experience and experiment that we're going through. Challenging ourselves and the client to seek higher aspirations and personal greatness, why that can heighten the value of all that the coach and the client seek to achieve by working together. But at some time in the process, both coach and client will have to face the many fears that plague our life paths and keep us all from achieving the things that mean the most to us. So here's part 1, understanding the big 5 fears in life, because fear does kill everything. Remember the entrepreneur starting a new business that was describing to me what he was going through and how he was dealing with his challenges. He then looked me straight in the eye and spoke a great truth. Don't you know, fear kills everything. Indeed it does. Fear kills hopes and dreams. It kills relationships, confidence, and creativity. It can kill our joy and rob us of happiness. It can even ruin our health and take our life. Scared to death is not just a figure of speech. For some, it is a reality. Many good, great, and perhaps even glorious things by many people were not even attempted because of fear. They were afraid, and they became their fears. Fear kills everything. We fear things in proportion to our ignorance of them, said Christian Nestel Bovee. And all the great spiritual traditions and faith teach that fear is an enemy to ourselves, our souls, and our success. One of the most prominent messages that we must embrace, speak, and continue to affirm in a coaching experience is, it all comes down to courage. Overcoming fears and cultivating our courage is what this guide and this program and our help will assist us all to achieve together. Now let's look at the kinds of fears we all face. There may be thousands of fears and phobias that can plague our lives. Some say over 700, and others claim close to 7,000. Well, the real number is irrelevant. We know they are pervasive. Our fears come in all kinds, and they can range in intensity from mild anxiety that makes us uncomfortable to paranoid, psychotic delusions that can shatter our life and spirit. Dealing with fears that paralyze people may be beyond the experience and expertise of a coach, and not in the best interest of the client. Those situations may call for true medical, psychological, or even psychiatric care. And the boundaries between performance coaching, counseling, and therapy are not always as clear as they should be or could be. But there are boundaries, and a good coach should be very aware and very wise as to where coaching ends and where psychological counseling must begin, and to honor those boundaries. Heightened awareness, deep wisdom, and extensive experience are required by the coach who finds him or herself in the areas where fear is paralyzing. Now, the coach works best where fear is present and is stifling action and performance, but not where it is all pervasive and paralyzing. Extensive reading, research, thinking, and personal experience demonstrate that there are 5 major fears that need to be understood and faced when we want to improve our life and business. Now, with that understanding, plus a little bit of courage and a few basic strategies, fears can be overcome and reduced, and our life performances can be enhanced. The following are a brief review of the 5 fears. Fear of poverty and loss. A top Fortune 500 executive was going through some very difficult times. The division he headed and his own position was at stake. He related that on a drive home, he saw a group of children playing in a discarded appliance box. This sight caused a deep anxiety attack. He found himself sweating profusely and trembling. He says that he then had a vision of himself, homeless, poverty-stricken, and living in a box. Well, bad things do happen. How I respond to them defines my character and the quality of my life. I can choose to sit in perpetual sadness, immobilized by the gravity of my loss, or I can choose to rise from the pain and treasure the most precious gift I have, and that is life itself. Obviously, such a scenario was not likely, but his story illustrates a key fear. Our society rewards financial success. The loss of our financial well-being, job loss, overwhelming debt, inability to buy what we need and want would be a source of embarrassment and fear for most people. For example, we all know of people who have stayed in work they hate for years and refuse to take any steps toward personal independence because they were stuck by the fear of poverty and loss. This is a reality for many today. It is reported that Mark Twain once said that the lack of money is the root of all evil. Not true, but the fear of the lack of money, poverty and loss, is pervasive and powerful. For any clients who are in the coaching experience, this fear will always be their primary fear. And then there's the fear of failure. A good coach often asks their client, "What would you seek to do if you knew you would not fail?" Many projects, life changes, and important goals are not pursued because people are afraid they will fail. Deep in our psyche and prevalent in our culture is a deep fear of failure. Failure is a source of deep embarrassment, and most people fear it. A failure is not always a mistake. It may simply be the best that one can do under the circumstances. The real mistake is to stop trying. B.F. Skinner told us that. The fear of failure is also fundamental to other fears. Now, let me illustrate. A person may not want to leave his or her present position to pursue an entrepreneurial opportunity because he or she fears failure and the embarrassment that follows. But that failure may also lead to a loss of income and financial security. Thereby, the fear of failure and the fear of loss and poverty come together. Now, this illustrates how fears can come and feed and build on one another. As we will see further down our path to understanding, many people fear that failure will also lead to rejection, which is another major fear. There are many psychological and pathological reasons for our fear of failure. Our purpose here is to name it rather than to seek to fully explain it. Then there's the fear of rejection and humiliation. Except for a few rare individuals, all people are social creatures. We desire acceptance, approval, and appreciation from others. Most people can still remember some long ago childhood incident of exclusion, rejection, or humiliation by the other kids. Most deep therapy that people go through usually touches on how a child sought the approval of his or her parents and how successful he or she was in obtaining it. In many ways, everyone's life journey in some part deals with how we handle the fear of rejection and humiliation when we are embarrassed by mistakes, a faux pas, and failures, which may lead to exclusion and rejection. Asking for a date, seeking a job, making a sale, starting a new business, all subject us to possible rejection. Often, in order to be successful, we must grow up and mature by gaining the courage and the emotional capacity to handle rejection. The biggest hurdle is rejection. Any business you start, be ready for it. The difference between successful people and unsuccessful people is the successful people do all the things the unsuccessful people don't want to do. When 10 doors are slammed in your face, go to door number 11 enthusiastically, with a smile on your face. So said John Paul DeJoria. Again, we can see the connectedness between this fear and the other kinds of fears we face. See how this works? This is the bad news. But we can also see the good news, which is that gaining confidence and victory over one fear helps us to overcome the others. But we need to remember that the fear of rejection and humiliation is very primal and very pervasive. In my experience, this fear has the deepest grip over many. Indeed, it sits in the very middle of the 5 great fears. Then there's the fear of no personal value or personal contribution. The value of self-esteem has been oversold, for sure. The proponents of self-esteem programs often assert that bad and deviant behavior comes from the person's low self-esteem. Recent research and reality do not bear that out. Unfortunately, many bad acting people are bad. They often are self-absorbed sociopaths with high self-esteem. The proponents of self-esteem often make another mistake. That is to believe that high self-esteem is all we need. So these proponents teach personal rah-rah techniques so that people will feel better about themselves. Again, unfortunately, it is not that easy. Just feeling better about yourself will not make life go better for you. Self-esteem cannot be rooted in just who we are. It must be rooted in what we contribute to others and the value that we know that we can provide for others. You need to have a core belief that what you contribute can fundamentally change the paradigm or way of thinking about problems. Leroy Hood taught me that. Here's an illustration. I know a very fine surgeon who specializes in neurology. He is a brain surgeon. Does he worry about being unemployed? Of course not. Does he fear poverty and great financial loss? No. He knows that he will always be in high demand. He knows that he has a very valuable contribution to make to people. On the other hand, a 50-year-old assembly line worker knows that he can be replaced by a younger worker with a week of training. He lives in fear of losing his job. It's all I know what to do, he moans. His fear is pervasive. He may speak about his fear of losing his job and the economic security he desires. That's the fear of poverty and loss. And you can now see much of this is rooted in his fear of no value or no contribution. His partner on the same line may lose the same job, but he knows that he is a master house painter, a remodeler, and a professional auto technician, not just another guy on the line. Well, he may have some anxiety about losing his job on the assembly line, but he knows that he can go out and he can make a contribution and have significant value in the marketplace. He knows he will be okay because he is sure of his value and the contributions that he can make. These examples illustrate this fear. People who are confident about the value, both practically and economically, that they bring to others, live with less fear. Many of the other fears and anxieties are connected and arise out of this one. It is a killer fear. Now, fear of disease and death, and this may be the most primal and primary fear. Through the years, millions in crisis have recited the famous 23rd Psalm in the Hebrew Scriptures that says, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil." The shadow of death and disease is always with us. Being reminded of our approaching certain death is fearful. Yet, we all have had encounters with people who have come to terms with their approaching death. Their courage at that time is often awe-inspiring. Disease is also fearsome. The word cancer by itself strikes fear into all of us. Disease means the loss of our health, options, choices, freedom, and can be terrifying, sometimes even more fearful than death. However, we see the relationship with the fear of disease is deeply connected to the fear of death. Disease is the loss, the death of health, and portends our certain coming real death. Now, the coaching experience takes all of these fears seriously, but it must gain particular insight into the fear of death. In a classic book, Ernest Becker wrote in The Denial of Death that our fears, all of our fears, are rooted in the fear of death and the insignificance of who we are that becomes apparent to us through our approaching death. The fear of death follows from the fear of life. A man who lives fully is prepared to die at any time, said Mark Twain. Becker claims that in death we no longer matter. Becker goes on to claim that in our living we are attempting to put meaning and significance into our existence. We seek to deny or delay our death because it means that returning to the dust, the dust we came from, shows how meaningless we may be. That frightens us. It frightens us to death and it gives root to all of our other fears. If through courage, faith, achievement, and acceptance, we can diminish and defeat our fear of death and the insignificance it implies, we can better cope with, and perhaps even with boldness, face the other fears. Becker's work is very controversial, but the ideas he puts forward requires consideration and contemplation. If we want to get a grip on fear and what it does to us. In the foreword to his book, Becker quotes Spinoza, who said, "Not to laugh, not to lament, not to curse, but to understand." Understanding the roots, the reasons, and the interconnectedness and the power of these 5 fears is vital to helping us diminish our fears and increasing our courage. And in part 2, we'll talk about coaching and guiding strategies for facing our fears. Please reach out to me, Stan Houston, at stan@witradio.net, Witradio.net is our website, and 520-664-7002 USA.